Unmask the supernatural. Explore the history and future of parapsychology. Analyze legends and folklore. And welcome entertaining and informative guests as they probe irresistible mysteries that continue to haunt us. They may not always agree. In fact, they won't. But the Dueling Parapsychologists provide an investigative podcast that's not afraid to seek the truth and separate nonsense. With your hosts, Elliott Van Dusen and Darryll Walsh. Welcome to the Dueling Parapsychologists podcast.
All right, welcome to season 3. It is January. Actually, no, it is February 1st of 2023. Darryll and I we slacked off a little bit there last year. I think we only got 4 episodes up, but we're trying to get things back going. And tonight's episode is called The Great Hunt. And what we want to talk about is, where do you find ghosts at? And I mean, first off, let's start out, I guess, by asking each other whether or not we believe in ghosts. So, Darryll, do you believe in ghosts?
Yes, I do, but I don't know what they are.
And that's a fair answer. And the same thing with me. I definitely believe in them. People have seen them since the beginning of time. But with the current information that we have, there could possibly be a couple of different things that cause people to see ghosts, or what ghosts are. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit here with some of the research that we've done. But we are both believers in ghosts. What they are completely has not been defined yet by science.
And I even saw one, and I still don't know. I still say I don't know what they are, even though I have seen a ghost. So, yeah.
I was just going to ask you about that one because you've actually seen one. So it would have been funny if you said no, you didn't believe in it when you've seen one. I haven't seen an apparition, but I have experienced auditory sounds of footsteps, doors opening, closing. I have personally witnessed electronics be manipulated, doorknobs turn where there's nobody on the other side, objects move, things like that, but I have not seen a apparition. So Darryll, what are some of the stereotypes that you hear about where we can find ghosts? What are some things that kind of drive you nuts, I guess, about
just about anything on TV? Somebody's dusty basement, old hospitals, old hotels, old asylums. Essentially, and that's because of, for 2 reasons. One, we almost expect that, because they have had thousands of people maybe through them. And there's been lots of tragedies, perhaps, and we associate tragedy and ghosts, so we expect that. Also, the fact is, for reality TV, since ghosts don't appear on demand and may not even exist, period, it may be totally subjective, either ESP from our minds or hallucinations, or any number of reasons why there may not be such a thing as a ghost. So reality TV has to take their stars to these places so they can use up a lot of the time talking about the history and all that. And they make it when it actually, a ghost may appear very mundanely. I mean, look at when we were giving that talk a year and a bit ago, and you were discussing what we do and all that at the Westin Hotel, and I just wandered off into an almost, I wouldn't say pitch black, but very low lighting. And just as I was, which I did not like being in, and if you've seen some of our previous podcasts, or one of them anyway, I went into this a little more in detail. And just, I did not like being in that room, didn't think much about it, just thought, well, maybe there's something electrical going on. Turned around and there's a ghost boy. So yeah, so I mean, they tend to happen more like that than they do you're going to go to your local asylum and or nut farm. It's so they're dramatic if we go there, and there's a story to tell usually. And if you have any sort of ambiguous experience there, well, then you can very easily think that perhaps that's a ghost, And so that's why you don't see people going to well-lit office buildings. And that's also a reason why the people go at night. There's the old joke, why are ghost hunters only go out at night? That's because they have a day job. There's no reason a ghost couldn't appear at 12 noon in the city square, absolutely no reason whatsoever. But night, abandoned, spooky, things falling down, it just lends itself to that. And people like to do that because it's fun. It gets their, it gets their adrenaline going and all this type of thing. And sure, they're probably wasting their time, but they're having fun and they're doing something. At least they're not, doing drugs or, whatever. So that's a good sign, I guess. But yeah, and who knows? Maybe someday somebody will capture one.
Now, you mentioned a few. I was making some notes while you were speaking. You mentioned a few really interesting things. One, you said that a lot of these places that people go to either has had a tragedy or we expect that it has had a tragedy. Do you think that primes people going in there?
Oh, yeah. They, like I said, they don't go to office buildings, well-lit office buildings, glass towers. You'll never see anybody looking, in one of those glass office buildings that they seem to think everybody wants to look at, especially here in Halifax, or glass apartment buildings. And you don't, because it's too sterile, it's too bright, there's nothing there. If anything ever happened to anybody, it'd be all cleaned up and blah, blah, blah. You go to a place that's not so clean and tidy and everything, and that starts to set your imagination going. So whether or not there's an actual ghost there, your imagination will make you think it's so.
No, that's true. And you had mentioned something important about the television shows and the dark lighting. You and I both know that from experience of dealing with television producers and shows. That's all done strictly for dramatics. Even when you go into a house, no matter what you're doing, or you could even be in an office building, a clean office building, like you said, there's going to be artificial lighting there. With the camera crew. That's just how it is. So it's not like you and I getting a call to a private residence and going to a house and seeing it in its like semi-natural environment where the people have maybe a corner lamp on, the ceiling lamp on, all that stuff. There's no, we may have flashlights for darker areas or things like that, or we may have lighting that we need to set up in darker areas, but it's not all artificial lighting like television shows are.
Well, it's not all fake, in other words.
Absolutely.
We've both been in the business long enough to know that reality TV is fake 100% from start to finish. And whether it's ghosts or whether it's the Curse of Oak Island, where the very first episode, they're looking for anybody doesn't know, Oak Island is a small island. There's 365 of them off Mahone Bay here in Nova Scotia. And Oak Island is a small island, and there's a lot of, almost everything you hear about is wrong. But anyway, there's supposed to be a pirate treasure. They say it's Captain Kidd. It's was down at one point 100 feet, and then depends. They had tragedies. There's been tragedies and all a bunch of stuff. And so anyway, I heard they were going to do a show on Oak Island, and it's always been something that's interested me. So I looked into the first episode, and okay. If Oak Island, okay, let's just say, I'll just draw a very bad, it's in a peanut shape, but okay, so let's say the treasure is where I'm going to show you X, and then I'm going to put a B10 and an X up here. Now, hundreds of yards. All righty then, by looking at my own thing. Oh, look, I block out my ugly face. If the treasure is supposed to be here, okay, why were they digging out borehole 10 or borehole X hundreds of yards away. The treasure's there. It ain't up there. Okay. So that's when I knew they were only interested in entertainment. They were not interested at all in solving the mystery. And when you go back there, I forget there's an author, and we must talk about Oak Island sometime, because there's a lot of ghosts and weird shit that goes on there. But anyway, when you find out that some of the investigations never occurred, that the island was not deserted, 2 of the 3 guys who supposedly found the treasure actually lived on the island, and all this stuff. But yeah, and reality TV. So what? There are 6 seasons now, 9 seasons, 6 seasons. And
yeah, I'm actually really surprised that it's still going, because you're not the only one that has made that comment. I've actually heard somebody recently say that, like, come on, guys, it's like season 6. Like, is there even a treasure there? Like, what's going on? How long is this going to drag out for? How much more money are you going to spend?
Yeah, ways. In the 60s, a guy named Dunfield got a lot of people crapped on him, because what he did is he's tried to excavate a huge circle and go down. And that's the only way you're going to find what's down there now. It's not by putting a borehole or a small little, tunnel. You're going to have to rip up that whole section of the island. And they did it by now, first season, for a lot less money than they spent. But then again, I think it's the History Channel, and they pretty much drank the Kool-Aid on, as the saying goes, for the, craziness. But yeah, so
yeah, it's interesting, and it's a good point. We definitely should probably do an episode on that. There's so much history about Oak Island. And like you said, other things that happen on the island that are not treasure related, like ghost stories and things like that. You mentioned something else too, low lighting. Now, there has been a couple studies. I know Karen O'Keefe over in the UK has done. He did a joint study with a bunch of other parapsychologists, and one thing that came up was low lighting. And it seems like a lot of people have apparitional experiences during low lighting. What is your take on how or why low lighting seems to attract apparitions? Is it a form of pareidolia? Is it something else? What's your thoughts on that?
Pretty much that. In low lighting, things become ambiguous. You can't see as well. Not only that, it instills a sense of fear. We are animals. Okay. This whole civilization going to the moon, Michelangelo and all that, no, we're animals. We're only supposed to procreate and then die. That's our simple thing. And it also built into us is many fears. And one of them is of the dark. So as soon as the lights start coming down, our fear will start, even if it's subconscious, our fear will start going up. And if you throw into the mix that you're in a strange place in particular, but even in your own place, things become ambiguous when it gets darker. So you might, how many times in a non-ghost situation, when the lights haven't been on very well, especially Christmas Eve, if the Christmas tree is off and you're sneaking out to have a look, see who, what presents are under the tree, like I did many years, things can take on a totally different, meaning, because of the fact that your eyes are, just not made to see in the dark. And so, yeah, we see, and sometimes you see what you want to see, but I've had some fascinating things, happen that just didn't happen, in low lighting situations. And it's as simple as that. There's, low lighting will instill, instills ambiguity and excitement into the mix, when you put it that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also find, I know with me personally, when I'm in low lighting or dark lighting, other senses become stronger. For example, like your sense of hearing, because now you can't see, but you've heard a creak or you heard a crack, and so other senses seem to kind of fill in for you when your vision goes. But no, I thought that was a really good point, because low lighting has been associated to people seeing apparitions. You had made a very good point, which led into one of my first studies that I always talk about on podcasts. A lot of people have heard me talk about it. You've heard me talk about it. It's the 1922 Eleanor Sedgwick. She was an investigator with the Society for Psychical Research, and she conducted a phenomenological study involving apparitions. And you had said, if a ghost can appear in low light, then, why can't they appear at 12 noon when it's, completely bright and sunny out? And that's what she actually found, is that during her study, she found that ghosts can appear anytime, any place, under any conditions, whether it's sunny out, rainy out, foggy out. It doesn't matter. If they're going to appear and the conditions are right, whatever those conditions may be, it's going to happen.
Which makes an interesting point. How often have we seen ghosts and not realized it because it wasn't nighttime?
Absolutely. And actually another study, I'll jump ahead and then jump back to Eleanor. Cornell Hart was a parapsychologist and sociologist with Duke University. And in 1956, he actually did a study of apparitions. And it's not in my notes, but from reading the study, one of the things that he found was that ghosts are most of the time not transparent. They're actually full, look like a human. So it looks like someone else is standing in the room with you. When you turn the light off, you can't see them, but when you turn the light back on, they're there again, just like a human is. So I find all that really, really fascinating, because it ties into kind of what we're talking about that's still occurring today in modern ghost hunting. So much as I dislike that
and
term.
It's interesting to compare. I've been downloading Gutenberg.org, is an excellent resource for old studies, old books that have been written anywhere from, it has to be around the 1600s, because you can't pronounce English, or you can't understand English much more before that. But all the way up till well, I guess now it's 75 years ago, and so you can get a hold of these people, these many respectable people who did studies on various aspects of the paranormal, and you can actually access their books that they wrote. Because it's a 1923 book, for instance, you'd have to go to the Bodleian in England, in Oxford, and or down to Library of Congress, or some. You're just not going to find it on your own shelf. So I've been, when I tend to read stories about ghosts, not ghost stories, but about ghosts themselves, I tend to write down, okay. And the Census of Hallucinations, of course, by SPR. Also, I have it a few different places. Actually, I keep bumping into it. I must have downloaded it a dozen times, but it's fascinating. I mean, so all that stuff is, and you can compare that to what their belief was. And their belief was always that it was 3D. You saw ghosts, they were solid, they were 3D. And, you would not, except for the fact that they're dead, you would not think them any different, or they disappeared in front of you. You wouldn't think anything of seeing them. So it goes back to my point a few minutes earlier about, how often have we seen a ghost and not known it?
Yeah, especially if they appear as another person, depending where you're at and how many people are around. Actually, a great story about that. I'll see if I can get permission to use the photo, and anyone that's watching the video of this recording, I'll put the photograph up. But a friend of mine, he's an investigator named Jason Murphy here in Sydney. He is a co-founder of Haunts from the Cape. He took a photograph up at the cemetery, which is about 5 minutes from my house, called Hardwood Hill Cemetery. He was there with his wife and his kid, and he had taken a bunch of photographs. He always goes up there. There's a couple of cool tombstones with some historical figures. He knows all the history about it. But when he got home and he uploaded the pictures of the cemetery to the Haunts from the Cape Facebook Facebook page, he didn't even notice it in the photograph. It was actually people commenting about it. They're like, "Oh, that's crazy. There's like a person standing there in the back by the tombstone or whatnot. So upon closer examination, sure enough, there's somebody dressed all in black, standing quite a distance away by one of the tombstones. Now, his wife and kid were actually behind Jason when he took the photograph. So it wasn't, a lot of people had suggested maybe his kid had wandered into one of his frames or whatever, logical, deduction of reasoning. And no, they were actually behind him. It only showed up in the one photograph. It's clearly a person standing there. I actually sent it to a friend in California to have the photo analyzed, and the photo was not digitally altered or faked. It appears that the person in the photo is a real person in the photo, but no one else was seen in the cemetery that day. That there's like an excellent example of like a full apparition that is not transparent, that unfortunately they couldn't see it with their eyes, but the camera picked it up.
What was he taking a picture of?
He was actually taking a picture of a tombstone, and it was off in the distance that you could see the person standing there.
He just might not notice somebody in,
and that's the only other rational thing I could think of, is that,
or where that you're person didn't want to be in the picture, they could have ducked down until Jason and them left. So,
or saw someone taking photos and be like, oh, I don't want to get in the way, kind of thing, and then kind of disappeared. I did suggest that to him, and he's obviously very open. He's like, absolutely, that possibly could have happened, but that's really the only kind of logical explanation, besides like his kid, because his kid was there, and the apparition so far away, it possibly could be a child, but we were able to rule that part out. But yeah, whether or not he just was so focused on the tombstone that he didn't see the person in the back, that's totally possible, but very, very cool.
And many photographers have cursed themselves, especially back in the day of when it wasn't digital, that they were so set on a particular scene, they didn't notice there's something very discordant to what they were the effect they were trying to get, or the picture they were taking. And it wasn't until they spent a lot of money coming back home, to find out that, oh my God, I didn't, what's that sticking up there? And, ruin many a picture. So it's done it to me as well. It's like, yes.
Absolutely. But I thought that's really cool, because if a ghost is going to show up, in the photograph, they should be full, they should be a good quality photograph, not one of these orbs that get sent to us, not the mist, like that's all been debunked now. Like that all started from the ghost web days of Sharon and Dave Oyster, who used to run their ghostweb.com website, and they were the ones that kind of fueled all the orbs and vortexes and all that stuff. Going back to Eleanor, one of the other interesting things that she found in her study was that there was a surprising number of cases that she examined, which coincided with a frequent death in which the percipient knew the apparition and thus recognized the apparition. What is your thoughts on somebody dying and, within the first 12, 24 hours, a loved one or a family member sees an apparition?
Well, it's not uncommon. Of course, it's a crisis apparition. We would classify that as, and it's not that uncommon for people to actually almost get a goodbye. In some cases, it's reported that they actually were verbally addressed and actually did say their goodbyes. The ones that are interesting, of course, are the ones that the recipient didn't know that the person was dead, and they appear to them. So that's the really interesting ones.
I agree.
If you knew they're dead, then why? It could be anything from hallucination to a dream, waking dream, and various other things, or it could be real. I mean, can't totally dismiss that at all. But the famous one with Admiral Tyrone, I think his name was, in England, where he had a very famous admiral, and he was head of the squadron in the English Channel. And they were doing maneuvers, and he called for a really stupid maneuver, and his subordinates said, we don't have room for do that. Anyway, at the same time as he's doing that, his wife is in London, I believe it was, and she's having a party, and it's a garden party, and everybody's around. And all of a sudden, she sees her husband, Admiral Tyrone, walking across the room, from one end of the room to the other end of the room. And I don't know if this is an embellishment, but he looked like he was wet. So I think that might be embellishment, but I'm not sure. Anyway, at that very same moment was when he was killed, because his flagship could not do the maneuver he asked for, and they don't know why. Could be any number of reasons why. But yeah, so that's probably back in 1800s. That's probably the most famous, crisis apparition, and he was apparently seen by literally 100 people. So and nobody ever said, no, we just agreed to say that, or we didn't see that, or anything. So it makes for an interesting, it certainly makes for a very interesting question about those.
Absolutely. And it's funny that we've both, so what we did for the listeners out there is Darryll and I talked about filming this episode. We talked about what the content was going to be, but we did not share with each other any of the research or our personal knowledge about what we were looking into to discuss this. But it's funny because a lot of what Darryll's saying is tying into what I know and what I've researched, and vice versa. So, for example, when you said that, during the crisis apparitions, usually a message is passed along. It's funny because, again, that study by Hornell Hart in 1956, he found 8% of apparitions of the dead were communicated something that was truthful and accurate. As in, like, passing along a message or saying something that only the percipient. And when I say percipient, that's kind of a research term for a person, like an experiencer, or a person, just Joe Blow that's experiencing the event. Interestingly enough, too, and this study was done 34 years after Eleanor Sedgwick did, he found 85% of apparitions of persons would later be found out to be dead or dying at the time of their appearance, and were recognized by the percipient, same as Eleanor had found. 78% of the cases had some sort of emotional bond between the apparition and the percipient. So they were either a spouse, a family member, or a very close friend. Now, this part's interesting, and you could talk about this because you love the hypnopompic and hypnagogic sleep states. But 70% of the apparitions were seen when the percipient was in bed or had just awoken. And we hear this a lot. I felt like there was a presence in my room. I woke up, I saw an apparition at the foot of my bed, or I woke up, something woke me up, I looked, I saw this. What is your take on that? Because that comes up a lot.
Yeah, it does. And that's easily explained. It does not 100%, like I said, foreclose on the idea that, it could be a ghost appearing to them. But as we learn more about the brain, we know the hypnagogic, which means going to sleep, and hypnopompic, coming awake. But a lot of people just say sleep disorder, or there's various other terms they use because they, can't keep the term straight or whatever. And, night terrors, you name it. And essentially all it is that one part of the brain is awake and the other part isn't. So your dreaming part of the brain is still going while you have conscious, and you're still, this is actually has caused witches and incubi, succubi, and UFO abductions, fairy abductions, now ghosts, demonology. A lot of it can be explained by, and I had an interesting thing, I don't know if I told you about the two demons I saw once. Because your body is still locked down into being unmovable, because that's what's supposed to happen when you're asleep. You're not supposed to get up and start moving around. And but you become conscious, and you're sleeping, your dreaming is still, partially going on. And that can be very, very frightening. And so then you can see just about anything. I mean, I remember I've had two hypnopompic experiences, three that, and I had forgot all about them actually, because they were when I was young. And the most interesting one, if you want one example, is the time that I was reading Stephen King's The Stand, and it was the first paperback cover, and there's kind of an eye and a bird, and it's kind of very dark cover type of thing. So that's fun and dandy, and I don't even remember what's in the story because I never did like the story. And that night I went to bed, whatever, woke up, and why did I wake up? Did I turn the light on? Yes, I turned the light on. Something woke me, so I turned the light on. And at the foot of the bed were two demons with blazing red eyes looking at me that disappeared under the bed some fast. So I've seen a man dressed in black with a big, almost sombrero hat. Saw something else one other time, which is really out of my memory now. But I used to have dreams anyway of a man in black following me down the Bedford Highway, almost chasing me. So anyway, yeah, I've had some hypnopompic experiences. And for Shadowhunter, which I did in 2004, on our very first shoot, we went to Newfoundland and trip. And of course, we were shooting fairies at the time, UFOs. Wherever we went, we pretty much shot every person we talked to. We asked about everything, but sometimes they had multiple areas that they knew about, and we could use that later on in the show. So first night in the hotel in Newfoundland, and every one of us had some weird thing. I had to get up and turn on the light in the bathroom. I could not sleep in the dark that night. Some people saw something. Others had a panic attack. And you're under stress, you're exhausted, strange place. It's, if none of us had anything, I would be very surprised. But it was, and we all kind of knew that everything that happened to us was just our exhausted brains, creating this stuff. So that's hypnopompic and hypnagogics, or sleep state imagery, or there's a bunch of colloquial terms for it, and but essentially just malfunctioning of parts of your brain. They don't wake up all together.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually was in a paranormal roundtable once, and there was a medium there, and somehow the topic had come up about dreaming about loved ones that had passed away. And he had made a comment to me at the time that if I were to see my dad in a dream, to try and wake up and open your eyes, and you will see the apparition of your dad. But that would be exactly like what you're talking about, is waking up in that partial sleep state. Now, I did have, I think, maybe one dream of a loved one since that happened, and I tried it, but by the time my eyes woke up, there was nothing there. Yeah. I just could see the closet door. I might not be one of those people. Like my body and my mind might be able to switch really quickly, whereas other people can't, and other people do have sleep disorders. And they
usually happen within the year of the death. If it's a family member or somebody they love, it happens within a year. It seems to go away after a year. It can happen multiple times before that. My mother even used to think that my father was moving around furniture or throwing furniture or something, she hadn't spread his ashes yet. And she was worried he was angry and everything. And I said, Mom, if Dad was angry at you, no, I said, Mom, Dad loved you more than anything else in the world. And if you are gaining some form of support and compassion by having his ashes out there in the living room, he said, he's not going to be crashing up furniture and all that kind of stuff. I said, she always had her eyes shut. I said, open your eyes. It'll stop. And I said, besides, I'm in the basement because I was the main caretaker for her last 10 years of her life. I'm in the basement. Nothing up here happens without my hearing it. So, excuse me. I said, don't worry. And I had to explain this. Of course, that didn't go over well with Mom because she grew up in Cape Breton, and if you're growing up in Cape Breton, particularly from 1928 on, you're going to be instilled with a sense of the supernatural. And but once I told her that a couple times, it stopped. It just, I don't know if she opened her eye or not. She never told me, but she never brought it up again. But it was within the first year. And it was just her stress of being suddenly widowed after, I think they were almost 49 years of marriage, I think. So her first husband having been killed. And so anyway, yeah, it was just normal grief that you can go through. And yeah. But so she was having quite a lot of that.
That's fascinating, I find. The last part of the study conducted by Hornell, and we actually experienced a case of this. We did an interview, I guess, but 26% of apparitions were seen 2 or more times collectively by 2 or more people, while others were visible only to one percipient. And the case I think about this is that case that we did the interview of the husband and the wife outside of the town outside of New Glasgow, where they were all sitting around the campfire, and the old-fashioned lady with the 2 kids walked through their fire pit area, kind of party area, and only the husband saw it. The wife and the 2 friends did not see it.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting because you and I, had actually interviewed somebody that had that happen to them. The other type of ghosts, which is interesting because you would think that it would be a great place to go and hunt them, because they're always there, are the residual hauntings or the place memory hauntings, or also the term stone tape theory hauntings. Yes. That pop up because those are repeated appearances of an apparition in a particular place, and they frequently act in a repetitive and robotic way, and seemingly are unaware of their present day surroundings. People have done things like set up string and the ghost has walked right through it. They've seen ghosts walk right through walls where that wasn't a wall back in the day, it was a doorway. Or like us in that case, the girl walked across where the old bridge was, but there was a new bridge that was in better condition. 12 feet from the old one?
Maybe, yeah. Maybe
so it's almost like something's been recorded in the environment and it's replayed. Now, one of the most famous cases of this would be Henry VIII's wife that he had beheaded there, Anne Boleyn. Multiple people have seen guards carrying her and bring her towards execution. But unfortunately, those places are actually not very easy to investigate because we don't know when that recording is going to play. It's not like it if it did, we would see it all over CNN and CTV and CBC News, because if it happened every day at noon, like the Halifax Citadel Hill cannon that goes off, you would just prepare yourself. You'd show up at 11:50, get the tape recorder going and the cameras, and you'd catch it. But unfortunately,
it's done.
This happens very spontaneously and only under certain conditions. Now, it does repeat, and that's why we know about it, because there's multiple different witnesses that have seen it, but we never know exactly when it's going to happen.
I suspect meteorology plays a part. Weather plays a part. I don't know in what way. Electromagnetism does play a part in the paranormal, in all across it, actually. And so, I mean, it can cause hallucinations in certain people, which we investigated that house in the head of St. Margaret's Bay. And where everybody who ever slept in that little room all hallucinated things and called them ghosts, whereas they slept anywhere else except for one time. And in that case, the woman's bed was right against the wall where the electricity was coming in, unshielded electricity was coming in. And so she experienced a little boy, but everybody else, felt bad in that room and saw things. And so, that's kind of fascinating, actually.
It is. There was another analysis done by an Italian parapsychological investigator. I think they called him Ernest, but his real name was actually with an O at the end, so Ernesto.
Ernesto.
Bazzano, I believe his name was Ernesto Bazzano. So this was conducted possibly around 1923. Again, like you said, the older the studies are, the harder it's actually to narrow it down. But he examined 374 cases, and he found that 80% of those 374 residual haunting cases were linked to a death either in or on the premises, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So that kind of goes to our next topic on where do we go to find these ghosts. Now, some of the most common spots that I am familiar with, and based on my experiences, I've been doing this now for, I think it's my 25th or 26th year, I think, and you've been doing it double that. But hospitals, why is that? There's so much. Hospitals are terrible. The only time that I've ever been to the hospital where it was good was for the birth of my first daughter, Sophia, and the birth of my second daughter, Meadow. But other than that, if you think about it, hospitals are terrible places. You're only going there if you're sick or you're dying.
Or you, like me, worked in one. Worked in a couple, actually.
And actually, I love the fact that you did work in a hospital because, you worked in some of the hospitals in Halifax, which are very reported to be haunted. So what's your take on hospitals? Certainly we know that there's the death aspect there. People certainly are dying there, and they would have to transition over to whatever the afterlife is from that particular place, because that's where their consciousness, their bodily function or the physical being ceases, but then the consciousness would move on. What's your take on hospitals, having even worked in some?
I used to love working in hospitals. I've done a lot of jobs, and I've been a TV star. We do this podcast. I've been a best-selling author. I've been a whole bunch of other things that people probably salivate at the thought of. I'm a ghost hunter, for God's sakes. And yet the job I still missed the most was when I was a clerk in the X-ray department at the IWK, the Isaac Walton Killam Hospital for Children here in Halifax, mainly because I always worked off hours. And everything else that I have done since, and that includes teaching as well, has a little level of stress that goes with it. That never did. But what I loved was the fact that, and this goes back to low lighting, on the weekends, which was most often when I worked, most of the lights are turned off, or I would turn them off if people have forgotten. And it was wonderful. I knew there was something weird about at the old Halifax Infirmary. I didn't know that the IWK was while I was working there in the 80s, but when mid 80s and the early 80s, when I was at the old infirmary, there was lots of talk about it being haunted and everything. And I hadn't, it was only about last year that somebody told me, clarified it a bit. Figure in black seen walking down the halls. And I mean, the old infirmary looked like it should be haunted when you're in it. You were in it. So yeah, hospitals, because of that, you would think that there would be some, hauntings, assuming that it's discarnate, spirit of a human being that is a ghost. If we talk about that theory of ghosts right at the moment. Then yes.
And we have to clarify this too. We're talking about people that are clinically dead, not coming back. We're not talking about people having near-death experiences that have gone clinically dead but came back. You and I are right now. We're only talking about they have died and they are not coming back.
Yeah, exactly. And so anyway, you would think that therefore there would be, if that's the last place they were, that's where they would be stuck to. The theory that they can't move on because there was a few theories about that. They still have something to do, so much to do. They did, they didn't want to die. Or
don't know that they're dead.
Don't know that they're dead, or so they hang around the same place. Now, Dad never showed up as a ghost. Mom told him not to, but I, of course, would have had him do that. I just didn't talk about death to Dad. But I would come back, yes, and wait till I grab the damn camera. So,
Yeah,
okay.
you always taught that in your course. I think your
Yeah.
exact words were, while you're staring at this apparition and shitting yourself, I want you to reach for your camera, make sure that it's turned on, the lens cap's off, and get me a photograph.
I don't care how much it costs to get the brown stains out of your pants. I want that damn photo. Um, but also in hospitals, and that also got a chuckle. In the hospitals, also, there's a lot of electromagnetism. So very easy, obviously, for people to. And I don't think there's I do not believe there's a hospital, unless it's brand new, that isn't haunted, that I haven't heard a story about. Uh, and that, with that much death and sickness and agony in some cases, and
Despair, everything. Yeah,
despair.
every negative emotion you can think of, rage,
Yep,
anger, everything.
yep,
Yeah.
they're all there. And yeah, so and with electromagnetism, sometimes maybe that you hallucinate because of that, or because of your mental state, and that, or some combination of some third, a variable we don't know. Maybe it's the weather too, but it's not a hospital for whatever reason. There's probably a variety of reasons, but yes, hospitals are haunted, and that's one thing they don't like to advertise. Of course, is that the hospitals are haunted, and
No, they
I
don't. They
no,
don't.
even Nova
And
Scotia hospital's haunted.
yeah, and like, that's the sad thing is, there's certain times that hospitals will allow parapsychological investigators to investigate. For example, the guys that do the aware studies, they've done a proposal. It's gone through boards which have approved it. It's ethical, and of course, obviously, the hospital agrees. Now, if just Joe Blow Ghost Hunter was going to go to the hospital and ask if they can trape around with their tools, they're most likely, I would say 99.9%, unless it's a very small hospital and you got an in there, going to say no. And most of that is because healthcare and healthcare information rank extremely high on the Privacy Act. And like you said, they don't want that negative attention. And right now, the hospitals are getting enough negative attention, let alone, having ghost hunters run around us.
Yeah, and plus with all the electromagnetism, it would be totally disruptive to any. And here we could go into the equipment side of things. Any equipment that people think will help them find a ghost, which don't. And but so it would completely invalidate any reading they did get on all other equipment which can't find a ghost. So it would be useless, totally useless.
Yeah,
Data.
I do agree, though. That would be, if you're out looking for ghosts, that would be one location. That would be a great location to go to.
Yep.
For sure it would. The next one I had on my list, that from my experience as well, because I wrote two law enforcement books, and one thing that comes up quite a bit in the law enforcement world are prisons and jails.
Yep.
And when you get the story about what happened, a lot of it's a suicide that happened in the cells. It was a murder that happened between two inmates. And prisons, again, are high energy. You've got a lot of males trying to, males or females, if it's a female correctional center, going for the alpha. So there's a lot of rage, a lot of violence, a lot of domineering, a lot of emotions. Like, people are upset that they're incarcerated, or they might only get to see their family every once in a while. So there's like tears being shed. There's a lot of energy in those prisons or jails. That comes up quite a bit, of haunted jails and prisons.
Yep. And also, they also have a lot of electromagnetism. So there's always some confounding variable that seems to pop up every time that you think, oh, okay, well, maybe, oh, darn, I can't say that for sure because there's the B. So,
Yeah,
that's
that's a problem with parapsychological work, is there's so many factors. You can like kind of narrow it down, but at the end of the day, you can't eliminate all the factors that are out there. Some tools we don't even have to measure. Like we have nothing that measures human consciousness. Like there's just no tool that measures that, right? So, yeah, it's interesting. Actually, one thing I did do too, just for fun before the podcast, is I went through my bookshelf looking. I had tons of books, tons of ghost books, and I found this old rag kicking around here. Yeah, for anyone that hasn't seen it, it was written by some arsehole here in Halifax, Darryll Walsh. It's Ghost of Nova Scotia. But what I did is I actually went through that and just took all your ghost stories and kind of made like a little chart here. I didn't include like the creatures and sea serpents and all that stuff, but it was interesting. There was 32 ghost stories that you had published where it occurred on outside land. And then there was 25 ghost stories where it occurred outside on water. So that's quite a substantial, because you had 115 ghost stories roughly. So you had 57 occurring outside, and then the next big one was in a dwelling house. 25. There was 25 stories there. So 57 of your 115 occurred outside, either mostly near water, because even the ones that were outside, there was a lot of them walking along the shore, walking along the lake, the lake bed. So like water, which we do know, plays a part. I always think back to the case Lloyd Auerbach had out in California, where I won't go into the full story. Anyone that listens to any of our podcasts probably heard the entire story multiple times. But basically, there was one room that the people were complaining was ice cold all the friggin' time. And what they found was it was colder than the rest of the house, but there was also like a natural spring running underneath the house at that spot, which was causing the temperature change. So water definitely plays a factor in haunting.
It does, and that was my first version of that. 10 years later, in 2010, I brought out one with 280 stories, and I bet you if you did your math right now, you'd find an even greater difference between outdoors and indoors. And the stuff that I have since collected, and also much of it not done by any other author here in Nova Scotia. And if I ever sit my butt down in the chair to focus on it, my next ghost story, I thought of the title last night, and of course I can't remember. 2:00 in the morning. Okay. I tell my students, write it down, okay? Because you're not going to remember it in the morning. It doesn't matter if it's 1 + 1 = 2. The morning, you're not going to remember what was there.
Absolutely. And you know what? I actually had an idea, and I woke up, I grabbed my phone on the nightstand, and I made a note of it so that I wouldn't forget it. And actually, there was one time I was like, I had an idea. What was it? And I had to go back and look at it, right?
And interesting story. I don't know if I mentioned this before. I might have. Probably have. But anyway, the in Ghost Project Canada, and for those who have not seen our previous ones, I'll give you a very short description of it. What it is, it's a collection of all supernatural events across the country, across Canada, obviously, for the first one. And what we'll do is we'll do a geographical and statistical analysis to see what parts of the country have more witches or ghosts or ghost ships, where ghost ships most often seen, not always on water. And I was actually standing in a place where ghosts in Spry Bay, Nova Scotia here, every 7 years, a ghost ship is supposed to come down the bay and raid up onto the land. And I realized that I was on vacation. It was 3 weeks before my mother died, 2018. And I was on vacation, and I'm standing right where the ghost ship is supposed to go by. Oh, the wonderful goosebumps. And that's why when people ask me why I still do this, even if I'm a bit of a skeptic, I say, because of the wonderful goosebumps. The 10-year-old boy still loves this work. And so anyway, that's what we're doing for Ghost Project Canada. And anybody wants to volunteer, they can contact us. But it's, and where was I going with that besides explaining that? What was just before? Oh, yes, writing it down, title.
And water, how water is associated with a lot of hauntings.
That is going to be one of the things that we're going to try to, one of the variables we're going to try to see if of course it all depends on the study or the report. Sometimes we'll have to go back and look at literally topographical maps to see if there's a spring or river underground or something that could be causing many things. And some people think to do that homework, and some people don't think to do that homework. And it's kind of up in the air, I think, amongst a lot of researchers, whether water plays a part in creating the haunting situation, or, in other words, creating a true haunting situation, or creates the environment to make you think it's a haunting creation, haunting experience. So, like your example, I mean, it's perfect, and that was one of the first things. As I was, even before I officially trained to become a parapsychologist, it was one of the first things I learned as a kid was about having to look at all the different possible variables, and and tell you the truth, and I think I'm going to write a book on this, and I'm going to do a blog first, but I'm going to write a book, I think, because over Christmas I got books on Hardy Boys, and I grew up reading Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, and watching Scooby-Doo. Now, the one thing that all three of those have is that there's something apparently supernatural going on. And at the end of the day, they tend to find it's not. It's somebody trying to fool you.
Yeah.
Except in the later Scooby-Doos. They're actually the very latest Scooby-Doos. There will be something supernatural, but generally speaking, there will be somebody faking it for usually some nefarious reason. And but also and it's interesting because water plays so much of a part in Scooby-Doo, and it also has played a part in a few of the Hardy Boys. Nancy Drew, seems to me there was at least one book, underwater, because the boys are always on Barman Bay, and but it seems to me underwater was in one book, Nancy Drew, but there was a couple times in Hardy Boys, and of course in Scooby-Doo. But they trained me to be a scientist. They trained me to be a parapsychologist, not just to look at face value, but to do your investigations, take all the variables, all the clues, and take these clues and put them together and see where they point. Now, Sherlock Holmes in the movie in the 40s said people will stick to facts even when they signify nothing. And which can also be a warning that sometimes you don't have enough facts. You might have one fact which might lead you to look this way, but it actually, you're missing two more things that would make you look that way. So yeah, all these nice pithy little statements that that come up, quotes that you'll see. But overall, it's to do your homework and check for the hidden, because we just look at the face value. And but that's Scooby-Doo, Hardy Boys, and Nancy Drew taught me to go past the face value and look for what's underneath. And maybe you'll find in this particular thing we're talking about, maybe you'll find there is, a cold spot's caused by, or a leaking sewer pipe. Sometimes just bad odors show up every now and then in particular. And olfactory is actually not just for Bigfoot. And actually, it's not all Bigfoots either, but that's neither here nor there. That's another project I did. But also in the paranormal, smells. And, so you've got to, if you're an investigator and you've managed to boot out the owners of the house and shut off all the electricity, then you guys start looking through all the plumbing.
I know. No, really, if you're gonna like fully examine it, and obviously like not many, even like your guys that have been doing this for like 60 years, they're not gonna, you can only get away with so much because it's somebody's house, right? I mean, like I'm sure in an ideal world, we would even love to, and I could say this now because I own a Century home. Sarah and I bought a home that was built in 1913. So it
God forbid you get me to babysit your house when you're gone sometime. Have the whole thing ripped apart just to make sure.
But we basically gutted the entire second floor, and we found a couple of cool objects. Maybe I'll take a picture of it and I'll put it on this podcast. But we found like an old truck, We found old bottles of liquor. I guess the carpenters were drinking vodka while they were working, and they just stuffed it in the floorboards and things like that. So you never know what you're going to find. And from talking with the contractors, they said the same thing. That's why they love renovating old homes, because they said you never know what you're going to find in the wall. So,
Yeah.
I mean, in order to do like a thorough, proper investigation, you'd basically have to like not only level the person's home and tear it apart inch by inch, but then you'd have to go into the ground as well, like to talk about stuff like we just talked about. We talked about natural springs underneath the ground. You'd have to have soil samples done, because that same house I just mentioned a few minutes ago with Lloyd Auerbach, that was built on a former dump. So they also had methane gas coming up, which was, and it was a very dry area, and there was a lot of static electricity. So these people were actually seeing balls of light. And when it would touch a piece of furniture or a wall, it would like catch fire. But it was because the static electricity was igniting the methane gas. So yeah, I agree with you. In order to completely rule out that it's not natural causes, it's just impossible for us to do right now. I do think it would be cool to build a haunted house, though, because we know certain things that can cause people. And I know you and I tried to get our friend Donna, who sometimes listens to our podcast. So if you're listening, Donna, I think that would be a great thing if you could get us money to build a haunted house.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating. But going back to locations to find ghosts, I do think that prisons and jails kind of ranks up there with hospitals, just because of, like you said, it's got the electromagnetic energy there. It's got the despair and the human trauma,
Raw emotions.
It goes it actually leads in very well to the next spot that I personally feel, and we'll find out if you agree with me or not, but it's mental health institutions. And that's the polite term that I'm using, because back in the day they called them like the building for idiots, and the society for the mentally insane, and like there was all kinds of horrible names there. But not only did these institutions have horrible names, they actually did horrible things. They made a lot of these mental patients, people with mental health problems and disabilities, farm and sell products. So the institution would sell, whatever, potatoes, but it was all done on the labor of these mentally ill people. And a lot of times when they died, they just dug a hole and stuck them in the ground, because a lot of these people were dropped off to these institutions because their families didn't want them anymore, or they had no families. So they were basically abandoned, given to the state, and the state basically used them for free labor. And again, I don't even think I have to harp on the amount of negative energy that would be at one of these places. So I feel mental hospitals, the old ones, I should say. Obviously, we're not doing this in the current ones, but I do think that the old hospitals and mental institutions are very highly susceptible to hauntings.
Yes.
Yeah, and I feel like you're in agreement there. Now this one is interesting for you, because you saw a ghost at a hotel, but hotels pop up all the time that they're haunted, and there's even a TV series where Dan Aykroyd narrates it, Haunted Hotels. What's your thought on the hotels?
Well, hotels usually, it's kind of a mixed bag, actually. You're going to have your despair and your negative emotions, and you're also going to have your positive emotions and fun. And I think probably then you're going to have the in between, like the businessmen that are staying there, or businesswomen that are staying there, and it's neither fun nor bad. It's just something they got to do, and
got to lay their head somewhere. Yeah.
So it's So hotels, I would think, would be, of all that we've talked about, lesser haunted, not the least haunted, but lesser haunted than either asylums or hospitals. And hotels, of course, they do have a lot of electromagnetic, connections in that, but it's not always turned on. I saw mine, and there was very little lighting on in the room, so I should not have been, even though I was having physical feeling in it, that That I don't I don't know what. I don't know, but very uncomfortable feeling, which also you also had. But yeah, so hotels, yeah, that one,
I'd say they could be.
I
I'd
don't
say
don't disagree with that totally.
I'd say they
But
could be. The reason
I
why I
wouldn't
say that
say
is
go to a hotel, any old hotel, and expect to find a ghost.
no. I
You
think
have
if
to
you're
go to
gonna
one
if
that
you're
has a long history
a
of
long
findings.
history, a long history, and I think you should do your research on it and
Yeah.
see how many other people have experienced it. For example, I want to check out the Travel Lodge here in Sydney
Mhm.
because I had seen a TikTok by I believe it was Ashley Drake. She does really cool TikToks every once in a while about haunted spots all over Nova Scotia. Just little short 60-second clips. But she had mentioned it, and on I think it's Travelocity. Somebody had left a review saying that the motel was haunted. So and then there's other hotels where it's like they narrow it down to it's like room 606. Like if you stay in room 606, it's completely haunted and all that stuff. So I do think that is like a fair location to go to if you're looking to try and capture something. But
The older
again,
the better.
the older the better, obviously. Yeah, the more history. Now, with that being said, too, I've been in one of the most haunted houses the most haunted house I've ever been in Exeter, Rhode Island, and that would go through periods, 2-3 week periods where there's absolutely nothing happened. So
Yeah.
you got to think you're paying a couple $100 a night to rent a room for 12, 18 hours. You may or may not capture something, but I do think that
Yeah.
you do have a better chance there.
And that's why they fake the reality TV, because ghosts don't appear on demand. And yeah, and we can talk about my article, "Are Ghosts Extinct?" If you want to touch upon that later on.
For sure. I did make one more note when you were speaking at the start of the podcast, and you had talked about going into places that are falling apart. So I do think that you have to be careful. I know there's a lot of abandoned like mental institutions, abandoned hospitals, abandoned prisons that people do go. Ghost hunters go trancing around. Some people have permission. A lot of people don't, and they trespass. Do not do that.
Don't be a
Always.
ghost yourself.
Yeah, always seek out the permission, do it the proper way. But with that being said, you also have to realize that there could be other factors at play in those places. And you said the same thing. You could hear something falling. Well, it could be a piece of plaster off the wall. The building is literally, we've all seen the videos. We've seen it on the ghost hunting shows. There's garbage on the floor. There's paint peeling off the walls. The places are, they've had vandals in there that smash out all the windows. So while you're there, if you hear like a glass break, which is common, that's a common haunting characteristic. You can't just say, "Whoa, I think a ghost just smashed a window." No, it could have been a piece of glass that gave out while you were there. Yeah. And it could be something as simple as you're walking and the vibrations have caused it to fall.
Exactly. And so, you also should have two things very important about that whole thing, which you just said. You should be wearing steel-toed boots, and you should have the gloves that cannot be cut, because those are the two things that you're most apt to harm yourself by, unless something falls on your head. Maybe a hard hat too.
Well, no, exactly. Like depending on how dilapidated the building is, you may want to go in with a hard hat for sure. Yeah, exactly. And maybe the owner or whoever's responsible for the building, that might be one of their conditions that you get in there.
Exactly. So you have to dress for the location, and just to go willy-nilly, into a potentially dangerous place, is not the way to do or prove anything, because especially nowadays that we do not look for visual ghosts, we look for other stuff, which doesn't prove a ghost. But anyway, so don't become a ghost over wasting your time going into these places looking for ghosts.
Well, the one benefit to that is you will have all the answers.
That is true. You will certainly get the answers,
but hopefully
by the end of your life, at that moments after the thing falls on your head, you will have all the answers that you will have.
Yeah, you will have all the answers you want, but there's probably somebody here that's going to miss you, so don't do that. The last thing
annoying, in which case run to your nearest asylum.
The last place that I had that seems to pop up quite a bit.
You got to mention this one.
No. It's not too bad. I don't think you'll shit on it too bad because you had some of them in your book. But I wrote down historical locations / battlefields, and that could be forts and stuff like that. Because in your book you talk about the strange things that go on at Fort Anne. You talk about some of the stuff that goes on at the Fortress of Louisburg. It's funny because there's not a whole lot on Citadel Hill until like the more recent modern years. And exactly. I know you have a big problem with like the historical
that
spots.
Is fake from beginning to end. I got a phone call from Ottawa, and they were putting out a stamp, and they were going to do the Grey Lady of Citadel Hill. And I said, "What Grey Lady?" And I said, Citadel Hill's not haunted. I'm not just saying it. I mean, Edith Mosier, Roland Sherwood, Michael Mackenzie, which I always forget his name, Bill Jessam, myself, Vernon Oikel. I mean, how many people do you want to, talk to that have done all this and know all the stories, or most of them? And Citadel Hill's not haunted. But they're charging, and I went on a ghost hunt, and the person, the lady who took us around wasn't very. She thought I was one of those people calling themselves parapsychologists. She didn't realize I was a real one. So So anyway, she didn't like me by the end of it. But anyway, battlefields more so than because so many of them are unknown, in particular here in Nova Scotia. We do have a couple bloody bridges, one in Bridgetown and Grand Pre.
Yep.
We do have Fort Beausejour, of course, and Fort Anne was fought over, type of thing. And
we don't have any like crazy like war battlefields, but there is a lot of battles.
That's an American thing.
Yeah, there was a lot of battles up here that took place between the Mi'kmaq and the British, and then the Mi'kmaq kind of teamed up with the French as well. So there's that whole connection that the French and the Mi'kmaq were kind of fighting the British. So we do have spots around here, like you mentioned. There's also Bloody Creek, which I think you took photos of last summer or the summer before.
Summer before, took it down to Bridgetown. I had forgotten about the it was not Bloody something or other in Grand Pre, near Grand Pre, and but yes, I went down and took pictures of that site because it's one of the few that we actually hear.
And they actually have a monument there too, like to document the battle.
Yes. And I'm cataloging all the old forts we used to have in Nova Scotia, actually, just for personal interest. I don't think I'll ever have the time to write a book about it, but about them. But if you want to find battlefield ghosts, Ontario's the place to find them, and also the Plains of Abraham in Quebec. Those would be the two places to find them. Other than that, they're pretty few and far between. Between they would be associated maybe with a particular fort. Because, of course, the French and English are constantly fighting over. Well, Nova Scotia for 200 years, a century, was at war, and the French and English were always fighting. And the Mi'kmaq became the French mercenaries, and as did the Acadians, and which is two things which you will never hear about in modern PC times. And also that, so the forts themselves were often attacked. There were no set piece battles per se. So that's why I think we have a lot of ghosts here in forts, and Ontario and Quebec have, ghosts on a battlefield. And that's the reason. And plus they were famous battles, War of 1812, and of course the final battle for Canada where the British took Quebec. Well, excuse me, the last battle for Canada where the British took Quebec. There was actually one battle 1 week later and the British lost. Yes, the last battle between the French and English in Canada, and the English lost. Yeah, I forget where it was. Somewhere along the St. Lawrence River anyway. And they actually lost the battle. So technically, the last battle, the French took that one, but it was too late because the British had all the. If this was Monopoly, the British had all the hotels.
That's a good analogy. Yeah, that was the last one that was on my list besides dwelling houses because of my personal experience. That's usually who contacts us is people have a haunted home, so we come into the home. So dwelling homes, but unfortunately, all the other spots we listed are kind of like known to the public, whereas dwelling homes are usually private residences and people aren't normally out advertising it. They contact a local paranormal investigative group, and then that's kind of how it gets started. Is there any other? I mean, obviously,
you're missing.
Well, we already
a big one.
Well, okay. Well,
are you tonight?
Which one are you?
We got to argue over something here.
Which one are you thinking? Because we did say, I mean, ultimately, obviously, a ghost can appear at any place, any building, anything. But
I think you and I agree on this, though. Cemeteries are highly overrated.
Absolutely. I was gonna talk about that. That you don't go to a cemetery to find a ghost, and the reason why that is
that's not where they lived. That's not where they
died. It's not where they died.
Don't give a rat's ass about, unless they're buried against their wishes somewhere or something like that. We hear stories about that, particularly in years gone by. And that's exactly. I brought that up, in my Ghost Extinct article. And where you would hear if you didn't bury a particular person in a particular way, you would hear about it.
And you know what? People are really good, I find, at still to this day, because I had my uncle pass away in September. Doug Van Dusen, God love him. He passed away after battling cancer. And then my friend Mark Cameron, his mom just passed away.
Yeah. Did you extend my condolences, I hope?
I did. Thank you.
Little personal thing in there.
Those two people.
He was one of my investigators back in the day.
Yeah, he was. And unfortunately, they passed away. But the one thing I found was that the families really respected whatever their final wishes were. So for example, like my uncle chose to pass away at home, and he had told my Aunt Linda, no matter who wants to come to the house to see me, let them come say their goodbyes, whether they were friend or foe. And I know, like, Mark's mother did not want a wake and she did not want a burial, so she was cremated, and they're just going to have like a little celebration of life for her in the summer. And I find people are really good at respecting those wishes. I could see if you went against someone's wishes, like you said, and buried them when they didn't want to be buried, I could see that possibly causing an issue, although maybe not necessarily at the cemetery. But they would probably, I would assume they'd want to haunt them at their home, but
exactly. They would appear to the person and let it be known that they were extremely unhappy, and it wouldn't take much for the person to think, okay, there's some weird stuff going on here. What's this? What's going on? Oh yeah, I just buried so and so in that graveyard. They said never to bury him in. Maybe I better have them dug up.
And even Hollywood always portrays, like in horror movies or thriller horror movies, about getting rid of the bones, somebody's bones, like they're in a house and they find out that the person was murdered and buried in the wall, and then the people go and respectfully bury them, and then the haunting ends. And so we've taken that from real stories, and it's about respecting the dead and proper burial and things like that, right? So they're very sacred spots. I don't disagree with that, but I don't think you're going to find active ghosts in the graveyard. You're just not going to find it. There are some haunted graveyards, I will say that. I was in one in Rhode Island where Nellie Vaughn was accused of being a witch, and her spirit has been seen roaming around the area. In fact, the local police even get calls about a woman that matches her description, and when they go there, they're not there. So, like I said, again, a ghost can haunt any place, or an apparition can show up anywheres, but this is just not like a very common spot. People need to get that out of their heads, because you see on Instagram and TikTok, a lot of amateur ghost hunters are going out to the graveyards to look for electronic voice phenomena and things like that. What it is if you got guys that haven't been out in the field in a while, or you got new equipment that you want to test, guess what? That's a great spot to go to. You can go there and do a dry run of how you would do an investigation and test your equipment. And usually there's no power out that way, so you should get very little interference.
You know what's better for that whole testing thing is to take all that equipment you wasted all that money on and take it back and get the money back, because it doesn't do you shit.
No, you're absolutely. At the end of the day, you are absolutely right. The only thing that the equipment does, and we've talked about this multiple times, I talk about it on every podcast. There's no piece of equipment that can detect a ghost or capture a ghost or anything like that. But
capture your money, but it won't capture your ghost.
But what some of it can do is it can help you. Like, for example, like a thermometer, for example, it can help you establish if somebody's like, the bedroom on the top left of my house is always cold. It feels like it's freezing. And maybe you take that temperature and you find that there's like a 10-degree difference for some reason. But maybe it's because I live in a Century home with the hot water radiators.
Yeah.
And there's actually two radiators down in their lower level that don't work. Maybe that's, and the room is noticeably cold. But every time I go into my laundry room, I don't tell Sarah I think there's a ghost in here because it's freezing in here. I just know that the heat's not working. Exactly. You know what I mean?
Or insulation, could have fell, and now there's air getting in, which accounted for sound, can even account for some sounds if the wind blows a certain way, a certain unusual way or not very common way, that can also cause it. But what you have to do is use these. That's the only thing that's going to tell you there's a ghost. Then once you got the ghost, hopefully it's going to be repetitive, show up a lot. And then if you can find the pattern, then you can lie in wait for the ghost. But then you can bring all that equipment, because then you're going to want to know what's going on when that image appears. And that's when all the equipment, well, not the ghost box and that crap, but
oh my God, don't even get me started on that. We have to do an episode on equipment one day. Yeah, we haven't done that yet. We have to do an episode on that.
Yes, definitely have to do one, because people think they're doing science when they take this equipment into a house or a hotel or wherever, and they're not. They're doing technology. You're using technology and you're pretending you're doing science. And if you have a psychic with you or someone who's sensitive, unless you've spent 2 or 3 years testing that sensitive or psychic and know that they are in fact psychic or sensitive, that's not scientific. And you've got to make sure all your equipment's been tested elsewhere first. It's calibrated. And like I said, you have to essentially shut the power down and get everybody out of the house and or away from the location. And it's a much more complicated endeavor than it should be. And we'll go into that when we get into the equipment thing, but actual investigation thing. But if you're having fun, you're not doing it the right way.
No, it's true. It's true. I think
boring,
back to,
it's tedious. It's most likely going to end up with nothing. So,
I think back to like some of the investigations we did with the Center for Parapsychological Studies in Canada. It was like watching paint dry, like nothing happened.
Sometimes literally.
Nothing happened. Now, even just
like I said about Mark, you mentioned Mark Cameron. He was one of our investigators that heard those ghostly footsteps at the head of St. Margaret's Bay Road. After Don and Kira Lee had previously, an hour previously to that, had heard the same thing. And so, and he did not know that. And actually,
you know who that was? That was it wasn't Mark. It was actually Jason.
Was it Jason?
Yeah, it was Jason.
I thought I read the report. It was Mark. Okay.
No, that one was actually Jason. I recall that because I talked to him a couple years ago. I ran into him. I didn't know he does not karate, taekwondo with friend, and he's actually an investigator with PPRI too, Chad, and he was talking about that exact thing. It was in the because it was very distinct footsteps because it was a gravel driveway, and I remember him talking about that. Yeah.
And a lot of dead leaves around, so there's no way anybody could have ran away because you heard the noises. So it was a very interesting aspect to that. But okay, I'll dig out the report because I always thought it was Mark, or maybe it was told to me it was Mark at the time, and I didn't. I just missed it.
Check. I'm pretty sure you'll see it was Jason. I think. Yeah. Pretty sure. Yeah.
Unless it was three people that 3 times it was heard.
That's possible too, because we did have quite a big team there. I do know that recently, last year when we did an investigation, Pierre and I went to that haunted Airbnb, allegedly haunted Airbnb in Truro, and we were able to solve one of the problems. So one of the things that the client had told us was that every time they have a guest leave, they come in and clean the place up. They close the curtain to the back door, but every time they come back to the house to restock it or whatever, the curtain is pushed to the far right. And so we had set up our Nest cameras in that kitchen all night, and we were able to capture the fact that the vent was blowing air out to heat the kitchen up, but it took a long time for that curtain to slide across. So when you fast forward on the video, you can see the curtain, like, as you're fast forwarding, it's slowly working its way across, and that actually solved one of the problems. And when we told the client that, they were happy. They're like, "Oh, that's great." Now, it didn't explain the apparition that she would see, but we didn't see the apparition, so we couldn't really comment on that. But you're right. It's like it's very you got to be tedious, and you have to be very focused, and you have to use a lot of mental energy when you're doing an investigation because there's just so much stuff going around. You have to explore every noise. Like if you're hearing knocks on the wall, you've got to determine what is that? Is that something inside the wall? Like, is it a pipe vibrating? Like, what is it? And there's just so
if you're going to do it with equipment, it's going to cost a lot more than what the amateurs are paying now, because you have to find out how many rooms. Then you have to set it up, all your equipment in every single room. Then you have to have it coming to laptops and very large storage, external storage. And so, to do it the proper way, it's not only still boring and tedious, but also it's also labor intensive. And, it takes hours to set up and hours to take down, and then hours to watch the footage.
Oh yeah,
do exactly what you did with the camera and the curtain going. You've got to do that, and you've got to first you have to look and have still photographs that you can and get them blown up and refer to it, and then watch the video until you see something is different than what's in that you started with, your baseline photography. And
think like to capture a true, and when I say true electronic voice phenomena, I mean like one that would be considered like it would go towards evidence of the paranormal, but not proof. And there's a difference. But usually you have to have 2 tape recorders. They have to be the same brand. You have to set them on record at the same time. So what people also do is they set up video with audio as well. Yeah. So now you've got 3 devices. Let's say you do a 12-hour investigation. Now you've got 3 devices that have just recorded 12 hours of information. That's now 36 hours of work once you're done the 12-hour investigation.
Yes, exactly.
And trust me, listening to yourself or quietness, because if you put the stuff in a quiet room, you're listening to 36 hours of quietness. Nothing.
That's what you're listening for.
But you don't see that on the television shows.
No. And you must have seen me pulling my hair out when you mentioned EVP.
Yes.
But you kept that face completely blank.
I know
what. Listen, EVP is crap. Okay. If it's a whisper, it can be anything at all. If it's loud, why didn't you hear it? And not only that, the ghost, the spirit, has the possibility of putting, something on a magnetic tape, and then went to school to learn about digital, and now things on digital up there. They must have classes up there, I guess. They learned how to put in on digital ones and zeros, and instead of just appearing, which is what they've done for thousands of years. So take those GD recording things and just leave them at home, okay?
And what Darryl's saying is not wrong. I do agree with him there, because the problem with EVP is that there's like 4 different working theories on it. One,
unless there's a history of a loud noises, knocks, bangs, something that you're going to want, not just essentially going fishing and throwing your rod, the lead out to anywhere. You're going to go and do that to a spot you think the fish are going to be at. Yeah. And the same thing, if there's loud noises, bangs, shrieks, stuff like that, yes, then you bring your voice recording equipment. But other than that, if you think you're going to prove a ghost or find a ghost using just an EVP, listening for hours on end for maybe a whisper.
Here's one thing I found is when somebody sends me an EVP, if they tell me what they think it is, that's all I can hear. Yeah. I want to listen to an EVP, and I have listened to a few where it was like extremely clear and what the person's saying. Then you go back to the person and say, what do you think it said? I think it said, help me. Yes, that's what I heard too. It said, help me, or whatever. Yeah. But the problem with EVPs, 4 general theories on what they are. 1, we all hope that it's a discarnate entity trying to make contact with us. 2, it could be interference, radio, cell phone interference that can be picked up on the recording device. Yeah. 3, there's the theory of psi, whether that's coming from, and when I say psi, I'm specifically referring basically to extrasensory perception, telepathy, where the device somehow records either the investigator or the client's thoughts. And I actually know an investigator which this happened to. She's trying to find me the tape. It's in storage, but she actually had her own thought get recorded on the device, and her investigator picked it up while analyzing the information. And the 4th possible theory, and it wouldn't explain all of them, but it would explain a lot of them, is the audio pareidolia. Our minds are going to try and make sense of something that's nonsensical, and that's why when you hear like some sort of whisper or shadow voice or whatever, and somebody tells you what they think it says, that's why now all of a sudden you can't unhear it. Exactly. It's audio pareidolia.
Look at the clouds long enough, you're going to see faces and a whole bunch of stuff in it, because your mind 24/7, unless it's asleep, and then it's creating them, but it's still doing it in a way, except for deep sleep. But it's trying to make sense of the world, and it's trying to create phenotypes and of things. So it wants to match. So
even what you just said with the visual pareidolia, that's another huge issue in parapsychology, because we get sent ghost photos all the time where it literally does, if you look at it and you envision it, it does look like a face in the photograph, but what it is it's a flash hitting off a high gloss paint on a beam or whatever. If you stare at it long enough, you're going to see it. Again, a ghost would be, you would expect them to look like the brown lady of Raynham Hall, like a full apparition on the stairwell. Or I'll see if I can get permission to show Jason's picture on here. I'll email it to you after this, Darryl, but I'll see if I can get permission to share it with our viewers, kind of thing.
There was a meme actually about that. They said, listen, if you got a ghost picture or whatever, and you got to circle it in red and put arrows pointing to where this thing is supposed to be, it's time to give it up, Yeah.
And I laugh too, because like sometimes literally people will send pictures of they took a picture of their fire. They're in their backyard and they took a picture of their fire pit, and they're like, I see a face in the fire. Well, no, like a ghost is not going to be laying down in the fire, burning, spiritually burning. Like,
it's not Harry Potter.
Yeah, it's Yeah, or it's not like a magical face that's going to come up and talk to you. Like that's visual pareidolia, and it's very real. I'll see if I can find some examples of it, and I'll throw it on the video here. If you go to YouTube and watch our video, then give us a thought. What's to say? They always say, give us a thumbs up, a like, and subscribe.
Yes.
Do all that, and but. When you watch our video on YouTube, you might get to see like some pictures. Like I usually try and jazz up the video a little bit. If not, we appreciate you listening to us on Apple and Spotify and things like that. Any other things you can think of, Darryll, before we end this one? We gave them we're at about an hour and a half now. So with us being dark for half of last year, we've given them a really good episode here. I think there's some great content on here.
Yeah.
I'm excited to edit it and get it up there and hear some feedback. Is there any final thoughts on where to find ghosts?
Where to find ghosts? No, except your local, there is no such thing anymore, except your local streaming service, I guess. There's some pretty good ghost movies out there, but that's about the only sure way you're going to find a ghost.
Very
sure
good.
Way.
Trying to think. We've got, we're trying to hustle. We got some serious planning to do here. We've got the 2023 Halifax Paranormal Symposium coming up. It's going to be held at we can say the venue because it's secured. It's going to be held at the new Halifax Tower Hotels in Bears Lake. It is going to be on Saturday, October let me get this date right. October the 14th. We'll have some guest speakers from out of town, from local. Chris Stiles is confirmed. Darryll, you are going to do something. Our Ghost Extinct lecture.
I might do another one too, if we need to.
Okay. So that's going to be coming. So go to our website, ppri.net. You'll get all the latest information on that. We will be probably putting tickets out for sale, I would say, next month or April for sure. If you have any stories to share with us or have any questions, I do get the occasional Facebook message from some of our listeners, and I do respond to them. Give us a comment on Facebook or send us a message or whatnot. Send us an email. Last year we had talked about doing a live show where people could pop on and ask us questions and things like that. I'm going to work with Darryll on this, maybe plan something for March, and see if we can. We'll have some scripted content where we can talk, and then that way, if people pop into the chat and want to ask questions, they can. It won't just be Darryll and I sitting here looking like two fools, but we'll have some content to talk about, and then we'll answer any questions live if people want to come on and shoot us messages. Maybe we can get Sarah and Jeff to monitor some of the questions coming in.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess
thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, guys. Yeah, we're back. Sorry about the little hiatus we took, but you know how life is.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We'll catch you next time.
The Dueling Parapsychologist Podcast, an educational and entertaining podcast with Canadian parapsychologists Elliott Van Dusen and Darryll Walsh. To reach out to the Dueling Parapsychologists, see our Facebook page, Twitter, and Instagram accounts, or email us directly at info@ppri.net.